at the moment. It may just take a couple of minutes, but whilst I'm doing that, my colleague Matt Horton's also joined me. So Matt will also be helping to present on part of this. I'm hoping that's coming up. I've got it on my screen. I hope it's for other people as well. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That's great. If I'd like to also thank Colin Gibson, who's our data expert, for helping to put this together, and he was absolutely key in all of this. I'm not going to focus so much on the data side because I think that's been covered beautifully by Southampton and Derby, but I do think it's important just to follow on from what Joe was saying about evaluation, and which is why I'm bringing Matt in for that part of it. So I'll give a general overview to the approach we took. And then a couple of things that we found useful, and then I'll pass over to Matt to think about some of the evaluation side. So in terms of context, I think it's just useful just to, because it makes it's important to come up with another point that we're going to raise in a moment, in a little bit about our students and about the University of Wolverhampton. So just in terms of gender, we're about 60% of our students are female. In terms of ethnicity, and I think this is also quite important, our white students are about 38% at the moment. So what we would call our global majority students form quite a large majority. So we're beyond that tipping point in terms of 50-50 in terms of our white and global majority students. What's important that will come up in a moment is our age on entry. So we actually have quite a mature age on entry profile compared to some other institutions. So that's important when it comes to one of the data aspects coming up. And finally, in terms of disability, we have about 16% or so of students who have declared a disability, and particularly in terms of some of our deaf students, we have quite a large deaf student community, which is featured in our previous access and participation plans, but not so much in this one. So one of the things we have found in terms of that access side has not necessarily been the priority for the University of Wolverhampton. We've had to focus quite a lot on the fact that we've got those students in and we're supporting them. For us, a lot more of that concentration is on the continuation, the completion and the progression side. So a lot of our focus has really been on that part of it. In terms of the way in which we developed our access and participation plan in general, we had a small overview group. We tried to keep that fairly concise because that was sort of the writing group. And I think it's always quite important to get that writing group as tight as possible when you're putting something together. So we went through the steps similar to Southampton and Derby in terms of that review of the data, certainly looking at the EOR and the guidance that went with that, particularly the regulation notice sort of 1 and 6. We'll come back to that notice 6. I think the initial guidance that we got was quite repetitive. It was quite sort of long-winded, and actually we did feedback, and that has sort of made a change in terms of the notices that then went out. I think what we found useful was to have some smaller working groups around the different areas, so around access, success and progression, and working with our students union as well. And in terms of access, we did rely quite a lot on our Uni Connect partner. Now I'm conscious that there's been conversations this week. There was the review of Uni Connect that was published yesterday, and there were certainly conversations the other day in a webinar with the Office for Students about whether institutions should be including Uni Connect partners within their APPs, given the potential uncertainty of future funding. But we felt it was important that that was in there as part of the work that we're doing with schools. So we have included our Uni Connect partner, and I would suggest that if you're thinking of doing that, then you do so as well, because I think it is important that they're there. We worked through the development of the objectives. We looked at the sort of theories of change, as Joe was saying. It's quite a sort of basic framework that we've got within the template now. That did change from the original template. So the original template was a lot more sort of a more detailed theory of change, but actually that just meant that the length of the initial submission was getting far too long. So in some ways it's been simplified to support that, but it also means you've not really got that full theory of change within your APP as part of it. So we had separate theories of change that we then used and sort of put in the relevant parts as required. We also have Tableau, I ought to say, so we're a Tableau institution. So in terms of that data analysis and data looking, we were using Tableau as part of that, and Colin was our key person for developing those. The co-design with the students and partners was something that we struggled with during the time. I think it was Christian that was saying we had a compressed timescale. So that was something, given the period that we're working through for that Easter period, a lot of students were then concentrating on their assessments, and then they weren't necessarily at the institution that much. So we didn't have a lot of the interaction with students that we wanted. So we've been working this year with sort of working with students and focus groups and looking at the intervention strategies so that we can co-develop those with students. But I do think it's important that has to be part of that process, which we struggled with last time just because of the compressed timescale. I will say, when we got to the point of submitting to the OFS and awaiting feedback, and people may have had similar experiences in the past with things like this, I did feel that we were waiting for quite a long time, and then when something did come, it was then a very quick turnaround to give things back again. We only actually had 2 revisions that needed to be made, but I think we were waiting a month and a half for the first one to come through. We submitted, I think it was the 7th of July, and it was the August bank holiday weekend, and all of a sudden we had to turn something around very quickly, with people not necessarily being around over the August bank holiday weekend. And then we had to wait again for another long while, when I think there was then just 3 things to change, including removing or moving a decimal point. So I felt that we were waiting a long time, and then actually there wasn't an awful lot that needed to be done necessarily, but there could have been some more communication in between. So really, I think they're going to be looking at quite a lot. I realise that there's a staggered sort of deadline submission this time, but don't be surprised if you don't actually hear anything, but then are expected to turn things around quite quickly. One of the other things we put inside, I'm just going to put this here because it follows on from what Joe was saying about the evaluation piece, and Matt will pick up on this. But one of the things we've developed within the university in general is a sort of what works network, where we have academics from across the institution that support the evaluation of initiatives. So trying to get some independence into the evaluation, so it's not always the evaluation isn't always being conducted by the teams that are doing the activity. And that's been particularly useful for trying to raise awareness of evaluation. Those colleagues within the network can also help each other out to sort of improve the evaluative parts. We have experts in quants, experts in qual, etc., and mixed methodologies. So that's been a very helpful way in which we've sort of raised awareness of the access and participation plan and the projects associated with that, and the intervention strategies, and how they've been able to feed into that process as well. So that's something that we have found useful. I think in terms of data types, there are 2 which I'd like to mention, and Dan's just mentioned one of them in terms of the ABCs. And I'll start with that one. We didn't find this particularly useful for us and for our students, particularly as the actual quintile wouldn't necessarily be confirmed until sort of later in the sort of the student's life cycle. We didn't feel it was particularly helpful for us, given the nature of the targets we were looking at in terms of continuation, progression and completion. The ABCs wasn't that helpful, but also given that nature of the intersectionality within the ABCs, looking at a quintile makes it very hard to determine what intervention is required in order to address the group of students that are formed within that quintile. So we found that actually a very difficult determination in order to think about what intervention would then be appropriate in order to address the fact that a quintile in ABCs had been highlighted. Also for us, and going back to the data I showed at the beginning, because we've got a larger population of mature students, although they might have been eligible for free school meals several years ago, because it was only looking at the previous 6 years, actually a lot of our students could have been eligible for free school meals, but we wouldn't have been picking that up. So actually for us, that wasn't a particularly helpful point that was being made. And I think it was Christian who was saying that the OFS might come back to say, why aren't you using ABCs, why aren't you using free school meals. We did have that pushback from the OFS, and we were able to go through that within that phone conversation that Dan, I think, was talking about. So personally, for our institution, these targets weren't particularly useful, and for us, they were as helpful as a chocolate teapot. But that doesn't mean to say that they wouldn't necessarily be useful for you. Going on to that bit about the risk, and I think this has been mentioned, so I won't spend too long about this. But I do think it's important. I think it's within the current guidance not to try and think about gaps and then retrofit gaps to the EOR. It isn't really working that way. The thing that I found, and I think it's still within the guidance document 6, I found some of the guidance wasn't particularly useful for the example that was being given as to how to write a risk. And actually, from when I was putting those bits together, I found that one of the hardest bits in terms of thinking about the risk language and the risk terminology and how they were actually presented. And I thought I was following the guidance that was being given, and actually it was in a conversation within that small working group that we had, where we sort of unpicked it a bit and realised actually I wasn't writing it in the way that I think the OFS was expecting a risk to be written. So that does need some careful consideration. I think how that's articulated is important, and it might be now with some of the wave 1 examples, it might be helpful to have a look and see how that's been sort of put together. Okay, I'm going to keep quiet for a moment and hand over to Matt.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to provide a quick summary really on how we set out our evaluation within the APP. So firstly, the OFS and their guidance provides the option for HEIs to complete the evaluation self-assessment tool, also known as the CEF. So really, I find the CEF quite useful. We complete this every year at Wolves, and it provides a review of where you are in terms of evaluation, your strengths, gaps, expertise and capacity in all different areas like this. So it provides an overall review and also scores kind of your practice across 5 dimensions as shown in the graphic. So the data that's here, this is what we included within APP. So we put our baseline CEF scores and how we're looking to improve over the course of the APP. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so in terms of the plan as well, it'd be no surprise that we've aligned our evaluation approach to the OFS APP guidance, standards of evidence, and pulling on some of the guidance from TASO as well. So first, in terms of methods, we're employing a mix of quantitative and qualitative approaches for APP, and also, as Joe spoke about as well, bringing in the secondary data. So in Access, we've got the HEAT database, but also in post-entry, we've got secondary data on SITs and various systems, which kind of provides the opportunity for matched comparison groups as well. So in terms of the main graphic on this page, so it kind of shows the standards of evidence and the different types, and most of our evaluation kind of falls into type 2, around 91%, and then I think there's just one activity so it's about 5% of them fall into what could be classified as an RCT. I think we've probably understated the standards. That might be a few more that fall into causality and stuff like that, but really you don't know. There's a difference between using a method that can do that and finding causality in your results. Also, in terms of obvious one, you need to consider your capacity and expertise, and Phil picked up on this a minute ago. So what resource you've got, what capacity and expertise in the team and across the university. So at University of Wolverhampton, I'm the evaluation manager, so I provide support guidance, workshops, and one-to-one support. and support around ethics as well. And some of our projects, well, most of them are evaluated by practitioners and academics as well, bringing in through the WLV What Works network we set up. And the academics, like Phil said as well, brings in maybe that bit of independence and expertise and capacity as well. Not all practitioners are used to evaluating things, and even if they are, it's have they got the capacity to do that as well when they're delivering interventions. And some of our work as well around access has been commissioned externally to be evaluated. Another supportive function kind of around this as well, we've also set up the West Midlands Evaluation Group. So in this group, we kind of share ideas, resources, and present findings around various evaluations that we've done. In terms of publication, we've recently just published our first What Works report for the variation exercise, which is on our university website. And in terms of our APP going forward, I think the publications start from 2025, and these will be various formats, so website, blogs, conferences, possibly journals as well, and possibly on the TASO website as well, but we need to see what happens with that. So yeah, obviously there's discussion around what TASO are publishing at the moment, with if they all evaluations will go to them. There's one obviously important thing with that, if especially around journals, and if we have to publish on the TASO website, it will need ethical approval to be published at those levels. And to support that, what we've done a number of years ago at Wolves was set up a APP ethics committee. And it's just helped really simplify and streamline the process. So before, I was supporting different teams across different faculties, and each faculty had an ethics board, so the paperwork was different. Some of it spoke about human tissues, it just wasn't relevant. So we've got one committee, and the form's a lot shorter as well. It's about 4 pages, so that process is now a lot easier. We can have the next slide, please, Phil. Thank you. Okay, so as outlined in OFS guidance and TASO guidance, there's a bit of talk around employing validated toolkits within your evaluation. And I've just listed some here. So for access, there's the TASO's ASQ toolkit and the TAPE toolkit as well, which I've recently published. For progression, there's the careers registration survey, which has been validated. We've also there's for belonging, which is picked up quite a lot in APPs. There's the Manch-York survey, and there's other post-entry measures as well available in TASO's ASQ, including I think a few questions on belonging. Also, Staffordshire Uni, I've just seen a presentation a few weeks ago, currently validating a basic needs survey around the cost of living and accommodation and different factors like that. So that might be something other universities can use in the future. Next slide, please, Phil. And just picking up a bit more in terms of validated toolkits. So this is kind of a comparison between TAPE and the ASQ. So when looking at validated toolkits, it's important to consider the extent to which they have been validated. So here's a comparison between TAPE and ASQ. Currently, TAPE's probably the most validated access toolkit. It has predictive validity. So that means pupils who scored high on the toolkit items, so they had high levels of HE knowledge, expectations, academic motivation, they were more likely to go to higher education. At the moment, the ASQ toolkit's in quite early stages, so they haven't got that type of data. Both of those toolkits are available on HEAT and the TASO website. If you want a copy of TAPE, you can also email me as well. So that's really overall the summary on how we approached our evaluation in our APP.
Lovely, thank you, Matt. And then just to summarise and finish off some of the things that we found useful, which we have already discussed. So we have those working groups. We also have a separate evaluation group that was actually set up quite a long time ago with one of the initial access and participation plans, but has actually become a more broader evaluation group for what we're doing within the university in general. And we actually have some students as part of that group. We think it's important that students feed into that process as well. We've mentioned the What Works network. We still find actually that self-evaluation framework quite useful to complete. I do think it actually gives us sort of sense of progress sometimes when we look at it, in terms of, you know, where we do need to focus some effort and where we do need to think about things in the future. That simplification of the ethics process has really been useful for taking things forward. We have sort of faculty-based ethics boards, but the way that Matt's actually created this sort of form that all of the APP projects can use with the approval of one of those boards, so it goes through one of the faculty boards, has actually been very good at streamlining that process. And also means that it's a very consistent sort of bit of information that we can add. We can add a lot of the contextual information onto that ethics form before it's submitted. And then finally, I know that some members of the group found it really useful to be part of various networks, as been mentioned, I think, by Joe from Derby, but particularly the FACE APP group for the special interest sort of group. I know there was a wave 1, I think there's wave 2 sort of group as part of that. So there are lots of things, there's lots of help, there's lots of support, and I'm sure